It was Friday afternoon when my parents pulled up to my driveway, the back seat of their car filled with luggage, beach hats, and one shaking old dog wrapped in a blanket. My sister's dog, Toby. I recognized him instantly, though he looked nothing like the cheerful creature that used to jump into my lap years ago. His fur was matted, his breathing shallow, his eyes glassy and dull. My mother stepped out first, smiling wide like she was dropping off a gift. They left me with a dying dog. No food, no help, no care. I stayed up all night to keep him alive. And that night changed everything. Don't blink. This story will break your heart and rebuild it piece by piece. Can you keep him for a few days, honey? She asked casually, already handing me the leash before I could answer. Your sister's too stressed and we've been planning this trip for months. The air smelled like gasoline and lavender perfume. The dog whimpered. I looked from my mother's painted smile to my father's expressionless face. He didn't even turn off the engine. Just for a few days? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My father gave a short laugh. He's just old, not dying. Don't make it dramatic. Then he honked the horn twice, a signal like he was impatient to leave. I could still see the car's reflection in the window when the engine roared back to life. They were gone before I could even pick up the bag they'd left behind. One half-empty container of dog treats, a torn blanket, and nothing else. No food. No vet papers. No medication. That evening, I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor with Toby's head resting on my knee. His breathing rattled like wind through a broken pipe. I tried to call my mother 3 times. No answer. On the 4th attempt, she texted back. We just boarded. Can't talk now. You're a lifesaver, red heart. I stared at that little heart emoji until the screen dimmed. A lifesaver. Maybe that's what I'd always been to them. Not a daughter, not a woman with her own life, but a convenient pair of hands. The sun was setting, slicing the room with orange light. I noticed small details I hadn't seen before. The way Toby's ribs showed through his fur, the sour smell coming from his ears, the faint tremor in his legs every few seconds. I whispered, "It's okay, boy," but my voice shook more than his body. The old kitchen clock ticked so loud it felt like it was keeping count of his remaining breaths. By nightfall, the house was silent except for the slow wheeze of the dog. I laid him on a towel, boiled rice and chicken, and placed a bowl of water beside him. He didn't move. His eyes followed me when I turned off the light, but there was no strength left in him to even bark. I slept on the floor next to him that night. The tile was cold, but my chest was colder. I couldn't stop thinking about my parents, drinking champagne somewhere, laughing, uploading pictures of sunsets while I sat here listening to a dying dog breathe. At 2:17 a.m. he started trembling violently. I jolted up, panic slicing through me. His paws scratched the towel weakly, his eyes rolled back, and he made a sound I'll never forget, half whimper, half gasp. I wrapped him in my blanket and whispered, "Stay with me, Toby. Just stay." My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the ticking clock anymore. When he finally stilled, I thought it was over. I pressed my ear against his chest. There it was, faint but steady. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Morning came gray and heavy. I brewed coffee but couldn't taste it. My back ached, my eyes burned, and Toby lay motionless on the towel. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. I took a picture, I don't even know why. Maybe proof. Proof that I was here, that I hadn't imagined the cruelty of what they'd done. My phone buzzed again, a photo from my mother. She and my father stood on a pier holding colorful drinks. Her caption read, "Finally taking a break from responsibilities. Beach with umbrella." I stared at it until my hands started shaking. Then I laughed, a small bitter sound that didn't even feel like my own voice. Responsibilities. I walked to the window and looked outside. My garden was quiet. The same roses I planted with my husband years ago were blooming, stubborn, red, alive. And that's when the idea formed in my head. Not revenge, not yet, just the whisper of something cold and deliberate. By noon, Toby's condition worsened. He wouldn't eat or lift his head. His eyes looked cloudy and I could smell infection. I checked every corner of the bag they'd left. Nothing. No vet card, no prescription. Just old receipts and a crumpled napkin that smelled like perfume. I drove to the nearest veterinary clinic, one I hadn't been to in years. The receptionist looked at me like I'd dragged in a ghost. "He's very weak," she said softly after a quick glance. "We'll need to keep him for observation." "How much will it cost?" I asked, though my throat already knew the answer. She printed a slip of paper and slid it across the counter. $3,800. I looked down at the number, feeling the weight of every year I'd spent helping people who never helped me. Then I took out my debit card. "Do it," I said. My voice sounded steady, but my hand trembled slightly. When I left the clinic, the sky had turned a bruised shade of blue, and the first drops of rain hit the windshield. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, not from age but from the years I'd spent being too kind. That evening I called my parents again, not out of hope but curiosity. My mother picked up this time, her voice bright. "Oh, sweetheart. How's our little Toby doing?" "Our little Toby?" I repeated, tasting the words like vinegar. "He's in the hospital. The vet said he wouldn't have survived the night." Pause. Then a laugh, nervous, quick. "You're exaggerating again. He just needs rest. Don't be so emotional." I almost said something cruel, something final. But instead I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You're right, Mom. I'll take care of it." She seemed relieved. "See? I knew you'd handle it. We'll bring you something nice from the trip." I hung up before she finished. Something inside me clicked into place. Not anger, not even sadness. Just clarity. I realized then that people like them don't learn through lectures or guilt. They only understand loss. The kind that touches their comfort, their pride, their easy smiles. That night I cleaned the kitchen slowly. Every small sound, the drip of the faucet, the hum of the refrigerator, felt louder than usual. I noticed the framed photo of all of us on the counter taken years ago. I turned it face down. I walked into the spare room where I kept old papers. Insurance forms, property files, signed permissions from years ago. My father's signature appeared again and again at the bottom of documents I'd forgotten existed. One of them caught my eye. A notarized power of attorney for household management in case of emergency. Emergency. The word almost made me smile. I slipped the document into a folder and placed it under my arm. Then I walked back to the living room where the empty leash still lay on the couch. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the worn leather and whispered, "They wanted a break. Let's give them one they'll remember." The next morning the vet called. Toby was stable but weak. "You saved him just in time," she said. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. I saved him. Not them. Me. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. The light hit the photo frame I'd turned down last night, reflecting off the glass and painting the wall gold. I stood there for a moment, feeling something new, not pride, not peace, but power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need to be announced. I made breakfast for myself, something I hadn't done in weeks, and ate slowly, listening to the birds outside. Every bite tasted like a beginning. Then my phone buzzed again. Another photo from my parents, them at a seafood restaurant laughing. The caption read, "Living our best life." I looked at it for a long moment, then replied with a single message. "I hope you're enjoying it. You'll need the rest when you get back." I didn't add an emoji. I didn't have to. That night I walked outside and sat on the porch. The street was quiet, the air cool. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the hum of a distant car. I thought about everything that had led here. Every time I'd been told to not make a fuss. Every moment I'd swallowed words just to keep peace. Peace doesn't come from silence, I realized. It comes from reclaiming what's been taken, even if you have to do it quietly. Inside, the leash still lay on the couch, coiled like a waiting snake. And for the first time I didn't feel tired. I felt ready. Tomorrow they'd still be smiling for the camera. But soon enough I'd be the one holding it. The morning sunlight cut across my kitchen floor like thin gold wires, catching the edges of every unwashed dish, every unpaid bill. I hadn't slept properly since Toby was taken to the clinic, but for once my exhaustion didn't feel like weakness. It felt like focus. The last thing I said to my parents before hanging up still echoed in my head. "You'll need the rest when you get back." I made coffee but didn't drink it. I just watched the steam fade the same way I'd watched years of my life dissolve in their hands. Invisible, silent, gone. My phone vibrated once. A message from the vet. "He's stable but we'll need to keep him for a few days." The words "few days" made my stomach tighten. I knew what that meant. Every extra day was another $100, maybe more. I opened my banking app, stared at the dwindling numbers, and felt a strange calmness spread through me. $3,800. That's what it took to buy a life back from neglect. and to finally see who my parents really were. When I arrived at the clinic later that afternoon, the waiting room smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. A young woman behind the counter smiled politely. "You're here for Toby, right?" "Yes," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She handed me a clipboard filled with forms. "He's responding to fluids and antibiotics. The vet says he's a fighter." Fighter. The word hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, scribbled my signature and waited while she printed the invoice. The numbers looked almost unreal. A small forest of zeros lined neatly in black ink. "Do you want to pay it all now?" she asked. "Or set up a plan?" I took out my debit card and placed it on the counter. "All now," I said. The machine beeped. "Transaction approved." And just like that, the money I'd saved for my knee surgery, the one I'd been postponing for years, was gone. Walking back to the car, I didn't feel regret. I felt a clean, quiet anger. The kind that doesn't scream. It simply rearranges your life without asking for permission. That night, the vet let me visit Toby for a few minutes. He looked fragile but alive, his eyes clearer, his breathing softer. He recognized me, his tail thumped once against the blanket. "Hey, old boy," I whispered. "You made it." He blinked and something inside me loosened. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. I sat with him until the nurse reminded me it was closing time. As I left, I glanced through the glass window separating the treatment area from the lobby. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, each one holding a small story like mine. People saving someone who couldn't save themselves. For years, I'd thought of myself as weak because I couldn't cut my parents off completely. But as I stood there, I realized weakness wasn't what kept me around. It was hope. And that hope had just been buried under a $3,800 receipt. Back home, I cleaned the kitchen again even though it didn't need it. Cleaning gave my hands something to do while my mind replayed old scenes. My mother laughing as she brushed away my concerns, my father saying, "You always overthink things," whenever I questioned their choices. That night, I opened an old photo album, one I hadn't touched in years. The pictures felt like strangers. Family dinners, vacations, smiles that now looked rehearsed. I found one from my sister's wedding. I was holding Toby then, a younger version of him licking my chin while my mother fussed about her dress. Everyone had looked so happy, and yet I remembered how my father had whispered, "Don't ruin her big day with your moods." Back then I thought I was the problem. But sitting there now, surrounded by silence and unpaid receipts, I saw the truth. I wasn't the problem. I was the scapegoat, the reliable, guilt-prone daughter who made their selfishness convenient. The next morning the phone rang again. My parents. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Sweetheart," my mother chirped. "You sound tired. Don't tell me you're still worrying about that dog." "He's in the hospital," I said flatly. "Oh, for heaven's sake. You're so emotional," she sighed. "Just keep him comfortable until we get back. We'll handle it then." I could hear waves in the background, laughter, maybe a clinking glass. "Handle it?" I repeated. "You mean you'll post about how much you love family, again?" Her tone sharpened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that while you were posting vacation selfies, I was paying for the life you abandoned." There was a pause long enough for me to hear her swallow. "Don't talk to me like that," she snapped. "You chose to take care of him." I smiled, not from amusement but from understanding. They would never see themselves as wrong. People like them never do. "Of course," I said softly. "You're right." When I hung up, I felt lighter. Like I'd just dropped a heavy bag I didn't realize I was carrying. Later that day, I visited the clinic again. Toby was sitting upright this time, tail wagging weakly. The vet, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled when she saw me. "You've got a tough one here," she said. "He's improving faster than we expected." I scratched Toby behind the ears, feeling his warmth under my fingertips. "He just needed someone who cared," I said quietly. The vet nodded, almost as if she understood more than I'd said. "Most of them do." When I left, I noticed a bulletin board near the exit, filled with thank you notes and photos of recovered pets. There was a blank space near the bottom. I thought about adding one for Toby later. Not now. Not yet. On the drive home, I rolled down the window. The wind smelled like rain and asphalt, sharp and alive. For the first time in weeks, I felt like breathing didn't hurt. That night I sat on the porch with a notebook and a cup of tea. I started writing down every expense, every receipt, every date. Not out of pettiness, out of proof. Proof of what I'd carried for them without complaint. I made columns. Date, expense, reason. Underneath I wrote, 3,800, Toby's medical care, because they didn't care enough to. When I finished I stared at the page. The handwriting looked firm, almost defiant. That's when I realized the strangest thing. I didn't feel guilty anymore. Not for spending the money, not for being angry, not for what I was about to do next. Because guilt is what they used to control me. Every sigh, every guilt trip disguised as love. But love doesn't leave you alone with a dying animal. Love shows up. A few days later Toby came home. He was thinner but stronger, moving slowly from room to room as if checking that this was still the same house. I followed him, tears welling up when he curled up on the same blanket I'd wrapped him in that first night. You made it, I whispered again, but this time I meant we. That evening as I cooked dinner I heard my phone ping. Another photo from my parents, this time at an airport lounge. Heading back. Can't wait to see you and the pup. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I opened my drawer, pulled out the folder with the power of attorney papers, and placed it beside my dinner plate. The edges were still crisp, the signature still bold. A small smile crept across my face. I didn't know exactly how I'd use it yet, but I would. Not to steal or destroy, but to remind them that silence doesn't mean surrender. That night I poured a glass of wine and sat beside Toby, who was snoring softly. I looked around my small, cluttered house. Every crack, every photo, every unpaid bill, and for the first time it felt like mine. Entirely mine. I thought about all the times I'd tried to earn their approval. The sleepless nights, the apologies I didn't owe. Every sacrifice had been a silent plea. See me. Appreciate me. But they never did. Now I didn't need them to. I took one last look at the power of attorney papers and whispered, let's see how they handle responsibility for once. Toby stirred, pressing his head against my leg as if in agreement. I reached down, rubbed his fur and smiled at the irony of it all. How the weakest creature in this house had ended up giving me my strength back. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the faint scent of rain again, the same kind that had fallen the night I almost lost him. Only this time it didn't smell like despair. It smelled like something starting. Tomorrow they'd walk through my door expecting the same obedient daughter. They'd find someone else instead. The next afternoon the sound of tires crunching on my gravel driveway made Toby lift his head. His ears twitched, a low growl rising in his throat before he even saw the car. I didn't need to look, I already knew that sound. They were back. I stood at the window, wiping my hands on a dish towel, watching the silver sedan pull up like it owned the world. My father stepped out first, sunglasses perched on his nose, carrying nothing but his phone. My mother followed, tanned and bright, dragging 2 suitcases that looked heavier than her guilt. They didn't notice the welcome mat was gone. I'd thrown it out last week. She waved as if arriving at a family reunion. We're home, she called out cheerfully, her voice carrying through the screen door. Where's my baby boy? Toby barked once, not the excited kind, the warning kind. My mother frowned. What's wrong with him? He used to love me. I opened the door slowly, letting the afternoon air slip between us. He remembers, I said quietly. She blinked, confused. Remembers what? I didn't answer. I just stepped aside to let them in the same way I'd always done. Only this time it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like observation. The smell of their perfume filled my house immediately, layered with ocean salt and expensive lotion. My mother placed her bag on the couch without asking. We brought souvenirs, she announced, rummaging through a paper bag. Look. A seashell, some handmade soap. I cut her off softly. He almost died. Her hands froze midair. My father finally looked up from his phone. What? Toby, I said. The vet said a few more hours and he wouldn't have made it. They exchanged a quick glance, that wordless look people share when they're deciding which lie to tell. Oh, come on, my father said finally. You always exaggerate. He just needed rest. My mother tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Yes, dear, you worry too much. We know you love animals, but you can't keep blaming yourself for everything. I'm not blaming myself, I said. For once. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through their smiles. Toby walked slowly to my side, his fur brushed and shining, his eyes alert. He looked stronger now, healthier, proud even. My mother knelt to pat him, but he stepped back, pressing against my leg. Her face flushed. "Oh, he's being dramatic now too?" "He's learned a few things," I said. "So have I." I handed her a folder, thick with receipts, prescriptions and invoices. She hesitated, then opened it. The number stared back at her like a confession. "What's this?" she whispered. "The cost of love," I said. She looked at the last page, the vet's total, $3,800. Her eyes widened. "You paid all this?" I nodded. "Why didn't you call us?" my father snapped. I met his gaze calmly. "I did. You were too busy posting pictures of cocktails." His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. My mother closed the folder slowly, her hand trembling. "We'll pay you back," she said at last. "No," I replied. "You won't." I moved past them into the kitchen, the sound of my steps loud on the tile. The same house that used to feel small suddenly felt spacious. Mine again. I poured coffee for myself, not offering any. They followed, uncertain, like guests who'd lost their invitation. "Listen," my father began, trying to sound reasonable. "We didn't ask you to spend that kind of money. You made that decision." "I made a decision you wouldn't," I said. "To care." He rolled his eyes. "Oh please. You always turn small things into soap operas." That word, always, dug into me like a splinter. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't the problem, and here it was again, the same script they'd used since childhood. I turned off the coffee maker and faced them. "You know what's funny? I used to feel guilty every time I said no to you. But guilt doesn't live here anymore." My mother frowned. "What's gotten into you?" "Reality," I said. The next hour passed in awkward small talk. My mother unpacked trinkets, trying to fill the silence with chatter about the weather, their flight, some couple they'd met on the cruise. My father pretended to check emails that didn't exist. I nodded politely, watching the way they avoided the subject that hung between us. When she finally set a box of seashells on the table and said, "These will look lovely in your guest room," I smiled faintly. "There's no guest room anymore," I said. "I turned it into a study." She blinked. "But where will we stay when we visit?" I shrugged. "Hotels still exist." The look on her face, that flicker of shock followed by disbelief, almost made me laugh. Almost. Later that evening, the light outside dimmed, stretching shadows across the walls. I heard my father in the living room pacing, muttering about ungrateful behavior. My mother followed him, trying to calm him down. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You can stop whispering. I can hear you." He turned sharply. "Do you have any idea how disrespectful you're being right now?" "Yes," I said. "Finally." He took a step closer. For a moment I saw the same man who used to tower over me when I was younger. The man who could make me shrink with a single glare. But not this time. "You think you can talk to me like this because of some dog?" he hissed. "No," I said softly. "Because of everything that came before him." That stopped him. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. The air grew heavy. Even Toby sensed it. He stood between us, tense. My father shook his head. "You've changed," he said finally. "I had to," I replied. "You left me no choice." He laughed. A humorless sound. "You sound just like your sister when she throws her tantrums." "I'm not throwing a tantrum," I said. "I'm drawing a line." I picked up the folder again and tapped it against the counter. "You always told me family helps each other, right? So help me now. Understand that I'm done cleaning up your messes." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. That was the point. After they went to bed in the guest room, still theirs in their minds, I stayed up, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. The house felt different. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded louder, steadier, like it had been waiting for this silence. I thought about calling my sister, but I didn't. She'd only take their side. He always did. Instead, I opened my notebook and added a new line under the last entry. "They're home, but not welcome." I closed it carefully and slipped it back into the drawer. Toby snored softly at my feet. When I finally went to bed, I left their door unlocked, but I also unplugged the Wi-Fi router. Small things. Quiet reminders that control had shifted. The next morning, I found my mother already in the kitchen, dressed for the day, hair perfectly styled. She was stirring sugar into her coffee like nothing had happened. "Morning, dear," she said lightly. "I made some for you." I shook my head. "I'll make my own." Her smile faltered. "Are you still upset about yesterday?" "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm done." She sighed dramatically. "You've always been so sensitive. And you've always mistaken kindness for weakness," I replied. Before she could respond, Toby walked in, tail wagging. My mother reached down to pet him again. He turned away, curling against my leg instead. I looked at her and said quietly, "Looks like he's learned where loyalty belongs." When my father finally came downstairs, he was on the phone arguing with someone about a billing issue. I knew exactly what it was. The first ripple from the small changes I'd started weeks ago. "Why is the electricity bill in your name?" he demanded, waving the paper in my face. I smiled faintly. "Because I pay it." He glared. "You can't just change things without asking." "Can't I?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. "You signed the paperwork years ago, remember? For emergencies." He froze. "You wouldn't." I tilted my head. "Wouldn't what?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. He didn't answer. Neither did I. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I stood on the porch watching them load their suitcases back into the car. My mother tried one last time. "We didn't mean to upset you," she said softly. "We just thought you'd be glad to help." I said. "Once." She reached out, touching my arm lightly. "You've become different." I met her eyes. "That's what survival looks like." She stepped back. My father muttered something about needing space and climbed into the car. I watched them drive away, the taillights fading into the dusk. When I turned back toward the house, Toby was waiting at the door. The porch light flickered on automatically, washing everything in a warm glow. I took a deep breath and whispered, "They'll be back. But next time it won't be the same story." Then I closed the door, gently, firmly, and for the first time in years I didn't lock it out of fear. I locked it out of peace. When the door clicked shut behind them, I stood there for a long time, hand resting on the lock, listening to the quiet thrum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. For once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Toby rubbed against my leg, tail brushing my calf like a small thank you. I turned off the porch light, walked through the house and stopped by the kitchen window. Their car's red glow disappeared down the road, swallowed by the dark. For years I'd watched those taillights leave and felt left behind. This time I didn't. This time the leaving meant freedom. I picked up the folder with the power of attorney and set it on the counter. Its edges were slightly frayed from being handled so often these past weeks. That thin stack of paper had become something more than legal authority. It was a mirror. A reminder that the power they'd once used over me could now be turned quietly in another direction. The next morning I started early. The air smelled of rain and wet soil, the kind of scent that makes you feel both awake and nostalgic. I brewed coffee, fed Toby, and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked in an empty email draft. For a moment I just stared at it, feeling the tug of hesitation that always came before I did something irreversible. Then I typed the first message. The email went to the bank. I explained that I was the listed financial proxy for my parents and needed to review all active accounts for security verification. I used the language they taught me years ago. Polite, firm, professional. The kind of tone that gets things done without raising eyebrows. Within an hour I had access to a digital landscape of numbers and transactions. There it was. Monthly withdrawals for luxury subscriptions, credit card payments for things they'd forgotten existed, and a recurring charge for an insurance policy I didn't even know they owned. For years they told me they couldn't help me when I struggled with bills or repairs. But here it was, proof that help was never impossible, it was just inconvenient. I didn't transfer a cent. Not yet. I just changed the account notifications to my email address. Small steps. Quiet ones. That afternoon I drove into town to pay my own utility bills in person. The clerk behind the glass smiled politely as she handed me the receipts. "Your parents' names are still listed on these," she said casually. "Would you like to update that?" I looked down at the forms, at the familiar handwriting I'd seen my whole life. My father's bold, slanted letters. For a moment I almost said no. Then I thought of that night on the floor with Toby gasping for breath. "Yes," I said. "Update them to mine." The pen moved smoothly across the page. The ink shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. When I was done, I slid the papers back and exhaled. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like correction. When I got home, the house smelled like wet dog and coffee. Toby greeted me at the door, tail wagging slowly. I rubbed his head and whispered, "We're almost there." He didn't understand the words, but he seemed to feel the energy. Calm, deliberate, certain. That evening the phone rang. My mother's voice burst through before I could even say hello. "We just got home. Can you believe the power's out? Nothing's working." Kept my tone light. "Really? That's strange." "Well, the bill says paid by transfer, but it wasn't us." "Did you do something?" "Of course," I said. "You signed authorization for emergencies." There was a pause. "We didn't mean this kind of emergency." "Neither did I said quietly and ended the call. I sat there afterward, the silence heavier than before but not unpleasant. It was the sound of realization sinking in. Not for me, for them. Over the next few days the calls multiplied. First about the power, then the phone line, then the insurance payments. I answered each one calmly, like a customer service representative who happened to live inside their memories. "Everything's under control," I'd say. "Just consolidating things for simplicity." My father grew louder with every call. "You have no right to touch our accounts." "You gave me the right," I reminded him. "You just never thought I'd use it." He hung up the first few times. Then he stopped calling altogether. One evening, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter from their lawyer, polite but firm, asking for clarification on recent administrative changes. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside the toaster. They'd always used people like him to speak for them when things got uncomfortable. That's how they kept their hands clean. But words on letterhead didn't scare me anymore. Paper had freed me once, it could free me again. I drafted my reply the next morning, simple and factual. All changes were made under existing legal authorization, executed during an emergency period with proper documentation. I ended it with a sentence that made me smile. "Please assure my parents that all matters are being handled with care. The same care they taught me to show when someone depends on you." Later that week my sister called. Her tone was bright, practiced fake. "Mom says you've gone too far," she started. "You need to fix this before things get ugly." I sat on the porch watching Toby chase a moth near the steps. "Too far?" I repeated. "You mean after they left me with a dying animal and a vet bill the size of a mortgage?" "Oh, come on, you're being dramatic." "They didn't mean." "I know exactly what they meant," I interrupted. "They meant I'd keep cleaning up while they kept pretending nothing was wrong." She sighed. "You can't punish them forever." "I'm not punishing them," I said softly. "I'm educating them." She was quiet after that. Then she muttered, "You've changed," and hung up. I looked out at the yard, at the fading light painting everything gold, and whispered, "That's the point." Days blurred into a rhythm. Small steps, quiet changes. I transferred household insurance into my name, canceled the luxury subscriptions and redirected mail to my address. Each action was legal, deliberate and silent. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty, but guilt didn't visit anymore. In its place was a calm steadiness, like water settling after a storm. One afternoon I opened my laptop and checked the shared bank account again. My parents had stopped their usual spending. No new restaurant charges, no flights booked, no expensive purchases. Just silence. For the first time I saw restraint on their end. Not because they'd learned humility, but because they finally realized I could see everything. The phone rang again that evening. My father this time, his voice lower, measured. "We need to talk." "About what?" He hesitated. "About this situation. We didn't expect you to take things so literally." "You didn't expect consequences," I said. He sighed. "We can fix this. Let's meet tomorrow." "Here?" "No," he said quickly. "At our place." I almost laughed. "Your place? You mean the one where the power doesn't work?" He didn't reply. I could hear my mother in the background whispering something sharp. "I'll think about it," I said and hung up. That night I sat on the porch again. The moonlight spilled over the yard, soft and silvery. I realized something. I didn't want revenge to end with paperwork. That wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the weight of everything they'd dismissed. The hours, the worry, the quiet strength it took to survive them. And I knew exactly how that lesson would begin. The next morning I loaded Toby into the car and drove across town. My parents' house stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac, as polished and proud as they'd always wanted to appear. The blinds were drawn, the yard perfectly trimmed. Appearances first, substance later. When I knocked, my mother opened the door. Her smile looked forced, brittle. "You came," she said, relief flickering in her eyes. "I did," I replied, stepping inside. "You said we needed to talk." The living room looked smaller than I remembered. All those glossy surfaces, spotless but lifeless. My father sat on the couch, arms crossed. "Why are you doing this?" he asked bluntly. "Doing what?" "Turning everything upside down. Making us look ridiculous." I took a seat across from him, hands folded neatly in my lap. "You don't need my help to look ridiculous." His eyes narrowed. My mother winced. "Please, let's not fight. We're family." "Family takes care of each other," I said. "Remember that phrase? You used it a lot when it suited you." My father leaned forward. "You think this gives you power?" I smiled faintly. "No. It reminds me I already had it." He slammed his hand against the armrest. "You've gone too far." Toby barked once, sharp, protective. My mother flinched. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I finally went far enough." I stood up, walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the mailbox flag was still up, bright red against the morning light. "You have mail," I said over my shoulder. My father frowned. "So what?" "It's addressed to me," I said. They didn't understand. Not yet. But they would. I turned back toward them, calm and steady. "You'll see soon enough what silence can cost," I said softly. Then I called Toby to my side, walked to the door and left them sitting in the tidy silence they'd built for themselves. A silence that for once wasn't mine to bear. As the door closed behind me, I felt the same peace I'd felt that first night alone. Not loud, not triumphant, just complete. And somewhere between the ticking clock inside their house and the wind outside, I knew they'd finally heard me, not through words but through everything I didn't say. As I walked away from their front door, the morning air felt sharper than usual, thin, honest, cleansing. The sound of my shoes against the pavement echoed softly, a rhythm that matched the steady beating in my chest. Toby trotted beside me, his tail wagging lazily, pausing every few steps to sniff at the grass. I didn't look back. Not once. For years I'd trained myself to glance over my shoulder to check if they were watching, approving, disapproving, but today the habit finally broke. Behind me, that perfect house stood quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before understanding settles in. When I reached my gate, the mailbox flag was still raised. I opened it, pulled out the thick envelope I'd mentioned inside their living room and smiled. Their names were printed on the return address, but the contents, the ownership transfer documents for the joint accounts and property utilities, were now officially registered under mine. The red ink of the verification stamp was still drying. The same papers they'd once laughed about signing for emergencies had become the symbol of their own undoing. And this time I hadn't raised my voice or thrown accusations. I'd done it with silence. Inside the house I made tea, chamomile, the kind my mother used to brew when she wanted to pretend she cared. The kettle hissed softly as I looked out the kitchen window. The light outside had changed, softer now, golden, spilling through the leaves like forgiveness I didn't owe anyone. Toby jumped up onto the couch, curling himself into a warm, patient circle. His breathing filled the room, steady and familiar. I envied him for that calm. I had earned mine the hard way. The phone started ringing again. I didn't rush to answer. I let it ring, once, twice, 5 times before I picked it up. My mother's voice came through, shaky, controlled. "We got your mail." I sipped my tea. "I assumed you would." "This isn't right," she said quickly. "You can't just take control of everything." "I didn't take it," I said. "You gave it to me. That was supposed to be temporary." "Then you should have read the fine print." There was a long pause. I could almost hear her breathing, her thoughts tumbling. "We can fix this," she said finally. "You can undo it." "I could," I said, "but I won't." Her voice cracked. "You're really going to do this to your own parents?" I leaned against the counter, watching sunlight flicker across Toby's fur. "You did worse to your own daughter. I'm just returning the lesson." Before she could respond, I ended the call. The sound of the dial tone felt cleaner than any apology she could have forced out. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Slowly, deliberately, beautifully. Mail that used to arrive for them now came to me. Utility companies called to confirm my new account details. Even the property tax notice, long ignored by my father, landed in my hands. It felt strange at first. The power, the independence, but not uncomfortable. Like wearing a coat that finally fit. They called less often after that. The last time my father tried once more to sound authoritative. "We're hiring a lawyer," he said flatly. "I'd expect nothing less," I replied. But even he sounded unsure, because he knew the signatures were real, the authorization legal, and the intentions unprovable. It wasn't fraud. It was foresight. Their foresight. My execution. After that they stopped calling altogether. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd gone too far. But then I'd remember that night with Toby trembling in my arms, their absence louder than any scream. The guilt that used to drown me now felt like something distant, hollow. One evening I found myself in the same spot on the floor where I'd sat with him weeks earlier. He came over, nudged my hand and rested his head on my lap. His fur was warm against my skin. I whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" His tail thumped once in reply. Outside, a car passed by, headlights slicing through the curtains. For a second I thought it was them, but the car drove past. And I realized even if they did come back, I wasn't afraid of the sound anymore. A month later, a letter arrived from their lawyer. This one was different. More polite, less demanding. It requested a mutual resolution to avoid further distress to both parties. I smiled. The words, mutual and resolution, had never existed in their vocabulary before. I took out my pen, wrote a short reply and sealed it. All matters are already resolved. The accounts remain secure and all essential bills are paid on time. Please assure my parents they'll always have light, water, and reminders of their own choices. I dropped it into the mailbox and felt something lift from my chest. Not pride, not vengeance, but relief. The kind that comes when you've finally said enough without ever raising your voice. Life found rhythm again. The garden bloomed. The bills came in my name. The days no longer revolved around their approval or absence. I started cooking for myself again. Real meals, not whatever was easiest. Some mornings I'd take Toby on long walks around the neighborhood. People I barely knew began to greet me by name. It was strange how visible I'd become once I stopped trying to disappear. One morning, a young woman at the post office said, "You always look so calm. What's your secret?" I smiled. Learning when to stop apologizing. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. I didn't correct her. Then one Sunday they showed up. No call. No warning. Just the sound of their car pulling into the driveway like a ghost refusing to stay buried. I watched from the window as they stepped out, slower this time, less sure. My mother's shoulders were slumped. My father's hair looked grayer than I remembered. They stood there for a full minute before I opened the door. "Can we come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside without a word. The air between us was thick, not angry, just heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. My father stayed near the door, arms crossed, while my mother looked around the living room, her eyes catching on the framed photo of Toby and me on the table. "He looks good," she said. "Healthy." "He is," I replied. She nodded. "You did a good job." I raised an eyebrow. "I always did." She didn't argue. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "We just want things to go back to normal." "Normal?" I repeated. "You mean the kind where I pay for your mistakes and pretend I'm lucky to do it?" Her eyes filled with tears. My father cleared his throat. "We made mistakes," he admitted quietly. That surprised me. Those words had never left his mouth before. I studied him for a moment, then said, "You didn't just make mistakes. You made patterns. And I broke them." He nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," I said, "we learn what family actually means from a distance." They stayed for coffee, awkward, polite. We talked about small things, the weather, the neighbors, the garden. My mother reached down to pet Toby, and this time he didn't pull away. He let her just for a moment, then wandered back to me. Before they left, my father said, "You're different." "I had to be," I said. "I couldn't survive as the woman you needed me to be." He looked down at his hands. "I see that now." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever get. And that was enough. They left quietly, no shouting, no arguments. Just silence. The The same silence they'd once used to control me now turned into my peace. That evening I stood on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, watching Toby play in the yard. The sky was painted with orange streaks, the kind of color that only shows up after a storm. For the first time in my life I felt still, not waiting for something to break, not preparing to fix it. Just still. Toby barked once, sharp and cheerful, chasing a butterfly across the grass. I laughed softly. Justice doesn't always bark, does it? I said aloud. Sometimes it just smiles. He wagged his tail as if he understood. I looked toward the road where their car had disappeared, then back at the house. My house. Every light was on, every room warm, alive. They would still think of me sometimes, maybe with guilt, maybe with confusion. But I'd stopped thinking of them as villains or victims. They were just people who taught me how to reclaim my silence, and how to turn it into strength. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and whispered to the evening air, "We're free now, Toby." The wind rustled through the trees, gentle and approving. Somewhere in that sound I could almost hear the laughter of the woman I used to be, softer, younger, still hopeful. She wasn't gone. She just learned how to stop whispering. And as the last light of the day touched my face, I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing. Some justice doesn't come through anger. It comes through silence and strength. If you believe quiet women can still fight back, hit subscribe, like this story, and tell me where you're watching from. Your story might be next.